record on this computer. Okay, we are now recording for 110 Acoustics Unit 2, and we're going to finish the second half of Unit 2 on the decibel from hell. All right, good stuff. Weeks 1, 2, and 3, we looked at frequency, wavelength, speed of sound, all of that. Now it's time to look at the other dimension of sound, namely not its frequency, but its intensity. So the decibel, and I'm going to, let's see, share screen here and go to where we were in our good old notes. And last week, let's pull this up here. All righty now. So last week, we looked at the decibel, and we started way up at the top, and we talked about force, pressure, power. I would make sure that we know the difference between pressure and power, okay? Pressure is force over an area. Power is work that is done. Now, intensity or amplitude of sound, that second dimension of sound, because the sound takes place in frequency, intensity over time. In terms of intensity, you can measure the decibel or intensity in terms of sound pressure or in terms of sound power. And we talked last week about why we wouldn't measure it in terms of sound power. And the reason we didn't, and all of us have seen that Zoom session, okay? But when you're looking at power, you can think about two thermometers, one pressure, one power. And I said last week, look at temperature, Celsius or Fahrenheit. You guys in the States look at Fahrenheit. The rest of the world tells temperature in Celsius. And as I said last week, look at the screen here. Freezing is freezing is freezing. Boiling is boiling is boiling. Doesn't matter whether you're in Canada, Europe, or the U.S., okay? But look at the amount of degrees between the two. Okay, Celsius may have 100 degrees, whereas boiling in the States is 212 and freezing is 32. So the top is the top is the top. That's the loudest you can tolerate before it hurts. The bottom is the bottom is the bottom. That's the softest it takes to just barely hear. People have measured that in decibels. Power, they call that dBIL, density level, or people have measured that in terms of pressure, dB sound pressure level, SPL. And we prefer, excuse me, to measure it in terms of sound pressure level because the ear, we said last week, works as a pressure device. Okay, let's hit escape, go back to the our notes here, scroll on down the page because this is all old hat. All of us have seen this already last week. So, we finished last week with the formula for telling the pressure of sound. Okay? And we said that formula has 3 parts to it. If you look carefully here, you will see the 3 parts. One's the ratio, some sound pressure over the bottom. And the bottom is the softest it takes to just barely hear 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. So there's the underlying statement, okay? We need to know what the ground is, we said last week. If you want to say an apartment building is twice as tall as a house, you need to know what the ground is. So we want to know what the ground is for intensity, for hearing sound. We want to know what the softest it takes to just barely hear. And we want to know what to call zero, whether it's in terms of power or whether it's in terms of pressure. Well, let's look at pressure, because the ear works as a pressure receiving device. Just like a microphone takes sound from my lips, then my sound is hitting the mic. Well, sound hits our ears. So what's the pressure of sound hitting my ear? What's the softest pressure it takes for a normal hearing human to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance, that's a yard, from a speaker with 2 ears? So here I am sitting there 1 meter away from my computer screen, pretend that's a speaker, and a sound is coming, beep, There's a little device on my eardrum measuring the softest pressure it takes for me to, I think I hear something. Okay, we'll call that zero, and that pressure is 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. Do we remember that from last week? Good. And we call that pressure 0 dB sound pressure level. So never think that 0 dB SPL means no sound, because it isn't. That's not true. It's the softest it takes for a normal hearing human to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with both ears. Okay? So we need to know that in order to talk about anything else. That's the ground. Good. Get it? Got it? Well, just great. All right, let's share screen again and go back to our notes. Good. So look at the formula. If you have some pressure over the bottom, there's the ground, 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. That's always the ground. Okay, and showing it in a picture here, this is my favorite picture. This is one we really should make a focus on carefully. 0.0002, that's pressure. So pressure is all along the bottom. dBSPL is the vertical. So the softest it takes, the softest pressure, we call that 0. If you increase that by a factor of 10, we'll call it 20. If you increase this now by a factor of 10, we'll now call it 40. And if we take this and multiply that pressure by 10, now we'll call it 60. And if we take this pressure and multiply it by 10, now we'll call it 80. Okay? So 200 has 1,000,000 times as much pressure as 0.0002. That's what we mean by the decibel is based on logarithms. Logarithms of base 10. So we're going 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, and okay, that's how we're measuring it. And the reason we do that is because the range of intensity is so big from the softest it takes to just barely hear compared to the loudest it takes before it causes pain. That range of pressure is so darn big that we don't want to deal with 1,000,000 increments. Okay, because the loudest pressure we can tolerate is 1,000,000 times the pressure of the softest we can just barely hear. And because of that huge range, we don't feel like dealing with 1,000,000. We'd rather deal with the decibel. And that's where the decibel comes from. So when you look at the 3 parts of that formula, take them to your hearts and bring it home. Because now we'll go to our notes at the bottom of the page and read it. Right here. Summary description. 120 dB SPL is the same as 120 dB IL. In other words, SPL is pressure, dB IL is power. And remember what I said, boiling is boiling is boiling. Consider that the ceiling, the greatest power or the greatest pressure you can tolerate. And then we'll look at the bottom, look at where the line says it right here, 0 dB SPL is the same as 0 dB IL. Call that freezing. That's the softest it takes. The softest pressure is 0 dB SPL. The softest power is 0 dB IL. Either way, freezing is freezing is freezing. Boiling is boiling is boiling. Think of freezing as the softest you can barely hear, and boiling is the loudest you can tolerate. Power is just one thermometer. Pressure is just another thermometer. The height of the thermometers is identical. It's just that power you can think of like Fahrenheit. It's got way more degrees, way more increments. Pressure you can think of like Celsius. Okay? It's got thicker degrees. They're bigger. Because freezing in Canada is 0 degrees, and boiling here is 100 degrees. Freezing in the States is 32, and boiling is 212. Look at how many more increments you have. That's what I'm trying to get across. So here, power has 1,000,000,000,000 increments between 0 and 120. Pressure has 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000 increments. Okay? It's not that the range is bigger. Please don't think that. There's just more increments in the range. And that's one reason we prefer pressure. because it has only a million instead of a trillion. And we say power equals pressure squared. Well, a million times a million is a trillion, I guess. Okay? Just think of power as a finer toothed comb than pressure. The width of the comb hasn't changed. It's just that it has more teeth in it. Okay? Good stuff. Carry on to the next page. So we get out of power, we stay with dB SPL. Put a star by this one right here, because to summarize the formula for dB sound pressure level, you've got the three parts right there. dB SPL equals 20 times the logarithm of a ratio. And note the three parts, 20, logarithm, ratio. Just what it says there. So to calculate any ratio, you got to know what the bottom is. To tell if a high-rise apartment is 10 times higher than a house, you got to know where the ground is. So the reference or the ground for dBSPL is always the same. It's 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. And what is that? 0 dBSPL. Good. Every time you increase the pressure, SPL, what it says here, think of that as the pressure. Every time you increase that pressure by a factor of 10, you go up 20 dB. So, look at the example here and follow me carefully. Sum dBSPL equals 20 times the logarithm of the ratio. So look at the formula here. Let's pretend we're dealing with 20 dynes per centimeter, 20 dynes per centimeter squared. You see where I'm pointing here with my gray area here? Highlight that. Watch this. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to this picture. What's 20? See the picture here? Here's 20. 20 dynes per centimeter squared. Okay? What's the decibel level of 20? Well, you can look at it and go over here. Oh, it's 100. Okay, well, fine. Let's find out how did we get to 100. Let's do it. So here's our example. 20 dynes, right where I'm pointing, 20 over 0.002. If you take your calculator, all right, and do 20 divided by 0.0002, go ahead and do it. You'll end up with 100,000. Anybody got a calculator there? Do it. When you go through the motions, good. And you get 100,000, don't you? Okay? Okay, now how many times did 10 have to be multiplied by 10 to equal 100,000? That's what you call a logarithm. So let's do this. 10 times 10 is 100, times 10 is 1,000. We've now done it 3 times. Times 10 is 10,000. Times 10 is 100,000. So that's the logarithm of 100,000 is 6, because 10 had to be multiplied by itself 6 times to equal 100,000. 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000, times 10 is 10,000, times 10 is, So how many times did it go? It's 5. I lied. It's 5. So 10 times 10 is 100, times 10 is 1,000, times 10 is 10,000, times 10 is 100,000. 5. So the logarithm of 100,000 is 5. What's 20 times 5? So you look. 20, whoa, something happened to my PowerPoint. What's 20 times 5? 100. And there you have it. There's your 20. 20 dynes per centimeter squared is 100 dB SPL. And you guys got to it by working through the formula. So on a quiz or a midterm or a final exam, if I throw a dynes per centimeter squared at you, like 2 or 20 or 200, I'll always be fair, I'll always do it on tens, you should be able to work out the formula. And that's what I want. First do the ratio, then find out what the logarithm of that ratio is, and then multiply that by 20. D is for done. Okay, good. Scroll on down the page. Now you're going to get into some weird stuff because everything is logarithms. Because the decibel is based on logarithms. And why do we base it on logarithms? As I said, because the range of intensity that we can hear is so huge that we want to be able to shrink it down to a manageable whole. I'd rather say that Mendy's hearing, I don't feel like saying Mendy's hearing is 365,412 and Heather's hearing is 492,406. Who wants to do that? It's way too many notes. I like Mozart, but too many notes. I'd rather say Mendy's hearing is 60 and Heather's hearing is 50. It works way easier. Okay, but really, when you're looking at those 50 and 60, if you peel off the veneer, there's all these logarithms underneath. Okay, here, look at where I've grayed out here. Doubling the sound pressure does not double the decibels. Do you put a star by that? Let me tell you why. Now you can see me. Okay, say you have a machine in a corner of a room, and it's making 90 decibels. And say you have another machine in the other corner of the room, and it's making 90 decibels. Please don't think it's 90 plus 90 is 180. The sum total is not going to be 180. Why? Because the decibel is based on logarithms. That's why. So let's look at our notes and find out how we got there. Read with me here. For example, if you double the sound pressure level represented by 20 dBSPL, you don't get 40. You actually get 26. So, how the heck do we figure that out? Let's talk about this in plain English. Let's say you have a 1,000 hertz tone and it's 20 decibels. 20 decibels SPL. Then you take a second 1,000 hertz tone and it's also 20 decibels. What's the sum total of those two tones? 26. It's just because of logarithms. Memorize it. Okay? 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dBSPL and another 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dBSPL. Add them together, 46. When you double the sound pressure, you go up by 6 dB. Okay, 1,000 hertz tone at 100 dBSPL and another 1,000 hertz tone at 100 dBSPL. What's the sum total? 106. Okay, when you double the sound pressure, you go up by 6 dB. Now, I know this one thing. Then why is that? Because of those stupid logarithms. That's why. So let's look at our notes here. Okay, if the two sounds are identical in frequency and phase, adding them together is a 6 dB increase. And now look at the little table that I gave you here. So, 2 to 1, you go up by 6. If you added 3 to 1, you go up by 10. 4 to 1, you'd go up by 12. But look at this. 10 to 1, you go up by 20. Put a star by that. Why? Because look at the picture here. And do you see this PowerPoint slide? As I increased my pressure by 10, I went up 20. And now you're seeing that right here. If you increase your pressure by 10, you go up by 20. All right? Let's go to another big round number, like 100 to 1. If I increase my pressure by 100 to 1, let's say if I have 100 tones, and they're all 1,000 hertz, and they're all 40 dB. Okay, you have 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB, and now you combine 100 of those tones, and they're 40 dB. They're all 40. Okay, how much do you go up? By 40. So 100 of those tones is 80 dB SPL. Think about it. One tone is 40 dB SPL. You put 100 of them together, now you have a sum total of 80. Well, let's see if the table holds that true. Increase my pressure by 100 to 1. So take this dynes per centimeter squared here, right there, and increase it by 100. Well, times 10 times 10. Now I'm at 0.02. Yep, go up, up, up. 40 dB. Oops, I moved my whole thing. You see what I mean? 40. Okay, and what does the table say here? Sure enough, 40. And this stands to reason. Let me take this home to you. Think of a choir of people singing. Some lady, now you have 100 people in the choir. Do you think it's going to be 100 times the intensity of that lady singing? My God, it'll blast the buildings across the street. What if she's singing at 75 dB SPL? 100 people isn't going to be 75 times 100. My God, 75 times 100 is 7,500. You have 7,500 decibels? That would crack the cement in the house across the street. You see what I'm saying? So when you're talking about this stuff, it's because of the logarithms that it doesn't go up like simple times 2 or times 10 times 100. Let's take this a little bit further, share a screen, go back to the notes, okay? In real life now, follow me with point number 2 here, because you got now that one about 6, okay? Let's go down now. In real life, however, you're normally not adding 2 tones that are the same. In real life, 2 sounds are almost always different from each other. Okay, so now what happens if you take a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL and you take a 2,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL? How now, brown cow? Because now the 2 tones aren't identical. They're different in frequency. One's 1,000 hertz and one's 2,000 hertz. So if a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL, and then you add to it a 2,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL, your sum total is no longer 46. Now it's 43. And that's because the 2 tones are different. They're not the same frequency. Okay? So here's point number 2. Read with me. If you have 2 different frequencies of the same sound pressure level and you're adding them together, you only increase by 3. So here, 45 dB SPL plus 45 dB SPL is 48. Not 40, not 51. You're not going up by 6. So here I give you an example. One guy is talking at 65 dB SPL. Do you see where I've graded out on the screen here? One guy is talking at 65. 10 identical guys. Let's say if I could make a clone of myself. Okay? So let's say Ted is talking at 65 dB SPL. My father can beat your father at checkers, yada, yada, yada. Your mother wears army boots, blah, 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 just blah. Okay, I'm talking at 65. If I could make clones of me, identical Ted, so now instead of one Ted talking, you got 10 of us talking. Okay? Oh, God forbid. And now there's 10 Teds talking at 65. Well, what happens when you increase the pressure by a factor of 10? You go up by 20 dB. So 1 Ted talking at 65, 10 Teds talking at 65 is a total of 85 dB SPL. Because when I increase my pressure by 10-fold, I go up 20 dB. If I increase my pressure by 2-fold, I go up 6. Remember? Okay. But that's if so 1 Ted talking at 65 dB SPL, 2 Teds talking is going to be 65 plus 6. It's going to be 71. Okay? Because we're identical. And if I have 10 Teds talking at 65, now I'm going up by 20 dB. Okay, but the thing is nobody does that because there's no such thing as cloning 10 Teds. It's insane. So now let's talk about me talking at 65, and then 9 other guys join me. And they're all different from me. The only thing they have in common is that they're other people. Okay, so 1 person talking at 65, and then 9 more people join me. Now there's 10. Okay, now what's my sum total? Well, now I don't go up by 20 dB anymore. Now I only go up by 10. Just like when I had 2 tones, 1,000 hertz at 40 dB SPL, and 2,000 hertz at 40 dB SPL. What's the sum total? 43, because they're different tones. Well, 3 is half of 6, because if the two tones were identical, I went up by 6 dB, right? But because they're different, I only go up by 3. I'll say that again so everybody gets it. 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL, another 1,000 hertz at 40 dB SPL, the sum total 46. Okay, one tone at 1,000 hertz at 40 dB SPL and a 2,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL. The tones are different, so it's no longer 46, it's 43. Now let's talk, instead of doubling it, let's talk about making it increase by a factor of 10. Okay, 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL, 10 1,000 hertz tones at 40 dB SPL, sum total 46. All right, now 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL, and a 2,000 hertz tone at 40, and a 3,000 hertz tone at 40, and a 4,000 hertz tone at 40, and a 5,000 at 40. They're all different from each other. And I'm putting 10 different tones together at 40 dB SPL. Well, now I don't go up by 20 anymore. Now I only go up by 10, because 10 is half of 20, just like 3 was half of 6. So now back to your notes and look at it carefully. All right, bottom of the page. In real life, you're not normally adding together things of equal frequency and phase. If you have two different frequencies of the same sound pressure level, adding them together increases your sound pressure level by half, 3. So 45 and 45 in this case is 48. For example, one guy talking at 65 dB SPL, 10 identical guys, look where I'm highlighting here, 10 identical guys, you'd go up by 20 dB. You'd be at 85. Recall, a 10-fold increase is a 20 decibel increase. However, 10 different guys talking at 65 dB SPL, now you're only at 75. Just like 3 is half of 6, 10 is half of 20. So, if a person sings at 70 dB SPL, what's the sum total of a choir of 100 different people singing each at 70 dB SPL? Are you with me here? Look at the screen and look at the bottom of the screen. Here's a quiz for you. Okay, here you go. If a person is singing at 70, and now you have a choir, and everyone in the choir is singing at 70, okay? And a choir is all different people. They're all different. They're not the same. If they were all identical, you'd go up by 40, because a 100-fold increase is an increase of 40. When you increase your pressure by 100 here, looky, looky, if I increase it by 100, I've gone up by 40 decibels here. But the thing is, so you would be at 70 plus 40 is 110. Look where it's grayed out there. But because the people in the choir are different from each other, okay, now my increase is no longer 20, or no longer 40 here, it's half of that, it's 20. So one person singing at 70 dB SPL and 100 different people singing at 70 dB SPL, what's the sum total now? 90. Okay, and that's why when you're in a church and you're listening to a choir, you're not sitting there plugging your ears trying to protect your ears from bleeding. Okay, really, you're not going 70 times 100 to equal 7,000 decibels. That would make your ears bleed. Okay, that would blow out your eardrums. That'd be louder than 10 screaming jet engines. Okay, really, when you have 100 people singing in a choir, you don't go up by 70 times 100. All right, I just want to drive that point home. Make sure it makes sense to you. Good. Now let's take it to a third thing. So not only does doubling not do 2 times like you think it would. Not only are sounds different from each other, but now let's talk about adding 2 different intensities together. Instead of adding 40 and 40, or 70 and 70, okay, let's talk about adding, look what it says here. Let's say you add 90 decibels plus 80. Not only are the tones different, but the amounts are different. So what's 90 plus 80? Well, look what it says here. 90 plus 80 is basically 90. Now, how the Sam Hill does that make any sense? Well, let's talk about it. Because everything is in decibels or in logarithms, because 100 decibels or 120 decibels is 1,000,000 times the pressure of 0, okay? Because 20 decibels is 10 times as much as 0, and 100 or 40 decibels is 100 times the pressure of 0, and 60 decibels is 1,000 times the pressure of 0, and so on and so on. Because of that relationship, you can think of the bigger number as the elephant and the smaller number as the mouse on the elephant. So think of adding 90 decibels and 80 decibels together. The 90 is the elephant, but because of logarithms, the 80 is like a mouse. And what's an elephant plus a mouse? Basically an elephant. So if you're weighing an elephant and it weighs a ton, and you take a mouse and you put it on the elephant's shoulder and weigh it again, you're still basically getting a ton. You'll get slightly more, but the mouse is so small you can just blow it away. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So when you think of the bigger amount in decibels, really it's way more pressure than the smaller amount. And it's all because of those stupid logarithms again. So now, let's look at our screen and share it. So look at here. A 90 decibel machine and an 80 decibel machine is basically 90 decibels. Because, okay, so when you're adding 2 decibel values together, and one is 10 dB more than the other, basically the amount is basically the larger of the 2. So adding 40 decibels SPL and 30 decibels SPL is probably 40 point something. So 40 and 30 is basically 40. Okay? 60 and 40 is basically 60. Because the 40 is so small compared to the 60 that basically it's 60. An elephant plus a mouse is basically an elephant. So read with me here. 45 and 36 dB, basically 45. Again, the 36 is like the mouse, the 45 is like the elephant. So then I gave you this weird kind of a table here, and we'll look at this weird table. I'll just, oh yeah, here you go. Okay, and that's what this is for. Don't freak at it, okay? Just look at it and let me explain it to you. To add 85 to 90, now I was saying an elephant and a mouse is basically an elephant, and that's when the 2 decibel values are at least 9 or 10 dB apart. 80 plus 90 is basically 90. 60 and 50 is basically 60, okay? That's because they're 10 dB apart. But what if they're less than 10 dB apart? Less, okay? What if they're 5 dB apart? Well, here's the example. To add, whoa, I moved it. To add 85 to 90. See what I'm highlighting here? Let's add 85 to 90. How would you do that? Well, what does it say? Find the difference between the 2 numbers. It's 5. All right. Find 5 on the curved line. Here's 5 on the curved line. Follow this point horizontally to the left. And what am I going to get? 1.2. Because here's 1, here's 2, 1.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, you know what I'm saying? So what's the difference between the 2 decibel values? And you're only doing this if the decibel values are less than 10. So I'm adding, let's say, 90 and 85 instead of adding 90 and 80. So now I can't just say 90 and 80 is basically 90. Now I'm starting to, because that mouse is now getting bigger. The mouse is now like a big dog. Okay, no longer am I talking a mouse on the shoulder of an elephant. Now I'm putting a great big dog on the shoulder of an elephant. You're starting to get it. Good. So the difference between 90 and 85, for example, is 5. Find that number on the curve. Boom, there. Go left, 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 1.2. So you would add 1.2 to 90. So 90 and 85 is basically 91.2. Okay, and that's what this table here is telling you as well. When the differences are less than 10. And look at this. When there's no difference between, look, and I'm going to highlight this to bring home a point. When there's no difference between the two levels, 90 and 90, let's say, there is no difference. Well, now what's the sum total you're adding? 3. And where have you seen that before? Up here. Where have you seen that before? Okay, 45 and 45 is 48. If there's no difference between the two, you go up by 3 dB. And that's assuming the sounds are different. And in real life, that's always the case. And let me just take this home to you. You have a sewing machine in the room and it's making 65 dB SPL. And you have another sewing machine in the room and it's making 65 dB SPL. Well, the sewing machines aren't identical, are they? Okay, they're a little bit different from each other. They may even be from the same company. Doesn't matter. The sounds are going to be slightly different. So you just assume they're different. Well, one's making 65, the other one's making 65. What's the sum total? 68. You've gone up by 3. Okay? Mind you, now let's make an imaginary world. A sewing machine making 65 dB SPL and an identical sewing machine making 65 dB SPL. Now what's the sum total? 71. Now you've gone up by 6. So if they're identical and you've doubled the pressure, you go up by 6. If they're not identical and you double the sound pressure, you go up by 3. One Ted singing in a choir at 70 dB SPL, 10 Teds singing at 70 dB SPL, you go up by 20. It would be 90. One Ted singing at 70 dB SPL and 10 different people singing at 70 dB SPL, now you go up by 10, not 20. Just like 3 is half of 6, 10 is half of 20. That's about as mathematical as it gets in our field. And here's a good thing. Now I'm going to take us home today, because we've gone around the block here, and I'll tell you some good news about our field where you don't even have to do that. So let's scroll down here. Good stuff. Now you're going to be going, oh my God, what is he talking about now? All right, here we go. Read this with me, then I'll talk to you, and then we'll read it again. Okay? Absolute and relative decibel values. As we've seen, you can't simply add 2 decibel values together like 1 plus 2 is 3. You can't simply say 90 plus 90 is 180. Can't do it, sorry, because of logarithms. Okay, so we've seen that. If each value is absolute and referenced to 0.0002. Okay, so you can't add, and all sounds that are called dB/SPL, all sounds, see this axis here, dB/SPL, all these values here, 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, those are all dB/SPL values. And what does that mean in English? That means they're all referenced to this corner right here, right where I'm circling, this corner. Okay, they're referenced to the ground. What did we say the ground was? The softest pressure it took for a normal hearing human to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. We'll call that 0 decibels SPL. Now that's the anchor. Always think of that as the ground. And all sounds referenced to that, the height of a house, the height of an apartment building, you have to know what the ground is. To tell if an apartment is twice as tall as a house, you got to know where the ground is. Well, it's the same with the decibel, okay? And though all these values, 20 dB SPL, 40 dB SPL, 60, 80, those are all called absolute values. Why? Because they're all referenced to 0. So look at our notes. Absolute values are all referenced to 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. That's the pressure. Everything, all decibels SPL that are referenced to that ground are called dB SPL. And as soon as you see the term dB SPL, think absolute value. Now, here's the good news in our field. You can, look where I put the word in italics, you can sometimes add 2 decibels together, like 1 plus 2 is 3. You can sometimes, and here's when you can. If you're adding a relative decibel value to an absolute value. A relative value to an absolute value. Do you see where it's highlighted there? Now, let me give you an example in terms of time, because that may help us digest and understand what this is talking about here. Where are you, Mendy, where are you located? I'm going to make an example of absolute and relative, but where are you located in the States?
Jefferson City, Missouri.
Jefferson City? All right.
Yes.
I'm way up here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I'm north of Seattle, about 90 miles north of Seattle. Okay, so my time difference from you, I'm different in time. Right now it's 13 minutes after 10 here. And it's probably 13 minutes after 12 by you. Okay, you're on Central Time. I'm on Pacific Time. So why don't we call those absolute time values? Because it's 12 o'clock, 12:10 your time, that's related to Central Standard Time. With me, it's 12 minutes after 10. And that's related to Pacific Standard Time. See, those are absolute time values. You want to know a relative time value? 2 hours. 2 hours. I can add 2 hours to Central Time. I can add 2 hours to Pacific Time. If it's 4 p.m. Pacific Time, if I add 2 hours, it's now 6 p.m. Yeah, there you go. Now I got 6. Okay? If I add 2 hours to 6 p.m., now it's 8 p.m. So I'm adding, but I can't add 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. It doesn't make any sense. What's 4 o'clock plus 6 o'clock? I don't know. You can't add them together. They're 2 absolute time values. But you can add a relative time value. I can say if it's 4 p.m., I can add 2 hours to that. Now it's 6 p.m. Okay? So you can say 4 plus 2 is 6. And we do that in our field all the time. You know why? Because we deal with hearing aids. We're not walking around with sound level meters measuring the dB/SPL of a sewing machine over here and a sewing machine over there and seeing what's double the sound pressure level. That's what people do in factories when they're worried about testing for noise, excess noise. Okay? We're not. We're fitting hearing aids on people. So let me tell you a thing about hearing aids. And make this really drill it into your heads, because guess what? You're going to see this for the rest of your studies at Ozarks. You're going to always see this. And the sentence is this, and I would write it down. Input plus gain is output. Input plus gain is output. Now in hearing aids, so if I take a hearing aid here, let me grab a hearing aid. I got a little bag of hearing aids here. So let me just grab a hearing aid. And here we go. Here's a typical hearing aid. Okay? Input is the sound coming into the mic. So here's the hearing aid. And at the very top, if I put my glasses on too, I can barely see. At the very top is a little hole. And that's the mic. That's what's picking up the sound. That's called input. So if the sound is from traffic, speech, whispering, yelling, a sewing machine, that's called input. And input is always dB/SPL. Input is always an absolute value. Input is always related to the ground of 0. Always, always, always. Okay? The second part is called gain. And when you think of gain, that's what the hearing aid is adding to the sound. Okay? So you think of gain as the muscle. That's what hearing aids are amplifying by. That's the gain. So input plus gain, that's the strength of the hearing aid in decibels. Input plus gain is output. And output is coming out of this weird little thing. Do you see that little thing I'm showing you here? That's the output of the hearing aid. That's the speaker. And that's what's hitting your eardrum. Okay? So if I put this hearing aid in my ear, stick this puppy in my ear, okay, and have it nicely sitting there. Okay, now I've got the hearing aid in. You can barely see it, I think, if I got it in there snugly. Okay, so there's a hearing aid in my ear. All right, input plus gain is output. That's what's coming out of the little piece inside my ear. Okay, out of this weird little piece of plastic here. And it came out of the speaker. There's the speaker of the hearing aid. So input plus gain is output. Gain is a relative value. Input is an absolute value. It's always stipulated in dB/SPL. Gain isn't. Gain is always stipulated in simple dB. Okay, not dB/SPL, dB. And then the sum total of gain plus input is output. And output is always stipulated in dB/SPL again. It's an absolute value. And now go back to time. It's 4 p.m. plus 2 hours is 6 p.m. 6 p.m. plus 2 hours is now here, 8 p.m. So the 2 hours is a relative time value. I can add the 2 hours to any absolute time value. Do you see what I'm saying? So input, always dB/SPL, plus gain, which is a relative decibel value, is output. And when you're adding a relative and an absolute together, you can CAN, underline, bold-faced, italic. You can add like 1 plus 2 is 3. Thank God. So now, if the input is 50 and my gain is 50, what's my output?
56.
50 and 50 is 100.
Oh,
You can add them, like 1 plus 2 is 3. My input is 60 dB and my gain is 30 dB. What's my output? 60 and 30 is 90. You can add. So when you're adding a machine, 90 dB/SPL, and another machine, 90 dB/SPL, what's the sum total? 93. See, you can't add 90 and 90 together to be 180. Because this one's an absolute decibel value, and this machine's related to the ground as well. Both of this machine is 90 dB/SPL, and this machine is 90 dB/SPL. I can't add 2 dB/SPLs like 1 plus 2 is 3. Can't. So if a sewing machine's making 65 dB/SPL and another sewing machine's making 65 dB/SPL, my sum total, 68. Okay? But now when you're talking hearing aids, input 65 dB/SPL plus a gain 40 dB. 65 plus 40 is 105 dB/SPL. How come I could add them like 1 plus 2 is 3, whereas I couldn't do that with the sewing machine? Because I'm adding an absolute and a relative dB value together. That's why. 4 p.m. plus 2 hours is 6 p.m. 6 p.m. plus 2 hours is 8 p.m. The 2 hours is relative. Well, what would happen if you asked me, Ted, what time is it? And I said 2 hours. You'd be going, what do you mean? What time is it? 2 hours. Well, that doesn't make it. You tell me that doesn't make any sense. Of course it doesn't make any sense. I'd have to say 4 p.m. or 12 p.m. or 1 o'clock or 3. Whenever I'm giving a time value, that's an absolute time value. It's related to my time zone where I'm in. Okay? But if I say 2 hours, that's a relative time value. And I can add 2 hours to any absolute time value. I can go to Russia and add 2 hours to 12 o'clock, and now it's 2 o'clock. Okay? So same with hearing aids. So now let's read what it says in our notes. Absolute and relative decibel values. Read with me. As we've seen, we can't add 2 dBs together like 1 plus 2 is 3 if each is absolute. Can't. However, you can in some situations if adding a relative dB value to an absolute dB value. For example, hearing aids. Input in dBSPL plus gain in dB is output in dBSPL. Now think of this in terms of 2 different machines. I'm just reading here, and I hope to God you got your notes there, okay? Think of this in terms of 2 different machines, each making 90 dBSPL. 90 dBSPL plus 90 dBSPL is 93. This is a gain of 3. So think of time as an example. 4 p.m. or 6 p.m.s are absolute time values. They are referenced to our time zone and ultimately to Coordinated Universal Time, Greenwich in the UK. The term 2 hours, however, is a relative time value. I can add it to 4 p.m. to make 6 p.m. or 6 p.m. to make 8 p.m. So all I'm doing here is reading what I had said. It's very important to internalize and grasp this and read the notes carefully and again, because this is what hearing aids are made of. Input, gain is output. And you will see that referred to in every one of your courses in hearing aids. And you first heard about it here in acoustics. And you can repeat CAN, can add decibels like 1 plus 2 is 3. If and only if you're adding an absolute and a relative value together. And the absolute values are input and output, and the relative value in the middle is gain. So read the sentence with me right where I've got it highlighted, right here. Right here. 90 dBSPL plus 90 dBSPL is 93. Okay, are you with me? And now look at the line below. This is a gain of only 3 dB because 90 plus 3 is 93. See? So that's essentially the way to read decibel values. Let's look here at some typical decibel values just for fun. You see this here? Let's look at typical sound levels. I'm highlighting this right here. Typical sound levels. Always remember it says here that 0 dBSPL does not mean no sound. Remember, 0 dBSPL is 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared, and this is indeed something, even though it's tiny. So you can actually have negative dB values like minus 20, because all that is adding another 0 and putting 4 zeros in front instead of 3. You can go to have minus 20, okay, because that's still something. It's got a little 2 in there. Anyway, a whisper is about 45 to 55 dBSPL. Ambient room noise. Ambient room noise. If I'm just sitting in this room and I shut my face and I'm just sitting here, Ambient room noise is about 40 dB SPL, 40. You almost never listen to 0 dB SPL. Your ears are always getting some sound, even at night when you're sleeping. What's average conversational speech in dB SPL? About 65. 65 dB is average conversational speech, 60 to 70. Yelling is around 80 to 90, 80 to 90 decibels, SPL. If I share screen and draw your attention back here to the notes and read with me. Shouting, 80 to 90 dB. A lawnmower, about 100 dB SPL. A jackhammer, about 120 dB SPL. Pain, because now it's so loud it hurts, about 140. So our range of hearing is from around 0 dB SPL all the way up to about 120, 140. That's our range of hearing, from just barely audible to pain. And that range is what's shown right here in this picture, from 0 all the way up to about 120. Okay, you can just see the big gray square. That's essentially our ceiling and our floor of hearing. They call that one's dynamic range. From the bottom, which is just barely audible, to too loud, because now it's beginning to hurt. That's your decibel room. That's your floor to ceiling. And you know what happens with hearing loss? Watch my gray area here. It just goes up. Do you see that? The ceiling didn't change. The floor went up. Now I can't hear till, say, 60 decibels. But 120 still hurts. Okay? So the thing to know about that is, if you go up to someone with hearing loss and yell in his ear, he's going to wind up and punch you in the head, because it's going to hurt just that person just like it hurts you. Okay? Because the ceiling didn't change. 120 is 120. It hurts. But the person simply can't hear below 60. He can hear from 60 up, but he can't hear below. He can't hear sounds softer. Whoa, I moved my whole finger. He can't hear sounds softer than 60. These are inaudible to him. Okay? So that's really what deafness is. It's an inability to hear the floor. The ceiling stayed the same. 120 is the loudest I could tolerate, whether I have normal hearing or whether I have hearing loss. It's my floor that went up. My dynamic range got smaller. And you know what deafness is? Deafness is when the floor meets the ceiling. The guy can't hear anything until it's 120, and when he hears 120, it hurts. He has no dynamic range. Okay? You'll be learning more about this in other courses at OTC. Meanwhile, do you have any questions for me before I shut off the computer here? We've done our 1-hour collaborate session. I don't think I've ever had either of you on a collaborate session before, have I? I don't think so. Have you been listening to the other sessions?
I love them.
Good. Good. I'm hoping that you have value. What's that?
I said you are so entertaining to watch. I make my husband come into the room. I'm like, come watch this. You have to see this.
Well, I always tell students, thank you. I always tell students the Zoom sessions are the most important part of the course because they summarize everything together. And the quizzes, I take them right from the notes of the Zoom sessions, right straight from these talks. Now, your books are always good because they help explain things from a different point of view. But I'm cheating here. I'm taking the stuff from the books and I'm condensing it all into these sessions. And that's why I always tell people, always print up your notes before you go on the Zoom sessions. Always have the notes printed up right in front of you because those notes are what I'm talking from. And then you can jot and make notes and whatever, scribble in those things. Did both of you have the notes printed up before the Zoom session today? You're good. You're good.
I have all the units printed up.
Good stuff. That's very wise. All right. Any of you, I imagine you may have questions. Do feel free. Do you have any questions to ask me from today? Any things that have come up that you are kind of not straight about or stuff and things?
I think I'm good right now. I'm going to go
Okay.
over it again after we're done.
Sure. And if you have any doubts, send me an email,
Okay.
stuff and things. I'm very reachable. I try to check my OTC emails every day. So, all right. It's been a real slice. Thanks for showing up. I'll stop the recording here anyway. I'll do that.